The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Cherwell again, everybody, and to the biggest village I've got for you in this run. This is a very important village historically, and it has a connection to Westminster Abbey thanks to one Edward the Confessor. He was born right here. This is Islip. Islip, slippery place. For the first time in Cherwell, we're in a place that's not one of the 7 towns of Otmore, but this one's still pretty close. This is Islip, which lies close to the point where the River Ray, which drains Otmore, meets the River Cherwell, the one that the entire district is named after. This is a fairly substantial village, and it has a really important piece of English history. Islip literally means slippery place, so you could have a lot of fun with its name. It's believed the Romans knew this place quite well. That figures, they built a road over Otmore after all. A while ago, the remains of a Romano-British villa were found about half a mile southwest of the village. Doubtless the Romans are an integral part of Islip's backstory, but around 1,000 years later, the village was also the birthplace of a man who helped shape British history, Edward the Confessor. Tradition holds that he was baptised in a church here in the 11th century in a building which no longer stands. The earliest parts of the present church date from 1200, almost 40 years after his death. During his life, Edward built the Abbey of St Peter at Westminster and bestowed it with lands and buildings at Islip, thus beginning a long-standing connection between the two. Even today, Westminster Abbey still has the right to nominate rectors of St Nicholas's Church here in Islip. The village is known for a few other things too. One street, for example, has a house called the World's End, where a famous wartime poet once lived. Let's explore who that was and the village in general. It's a really, really good one, this, and so beautiful. Let's slip into Islip. The little village of Islip has a big history. It stands as an ancient ford on the River Ray, near the edge of Burnwood Forest, where Saxon kings had a royal hunting lodge. The proximity of the royal lodge probably explains why King Edward the Confessor was born right here in 1004. The medieval road linking London and Worcester crossed the Ray at Islip. The original crossing was a ford, but was later supplemented by a bridge. We'll see the Ray and the bridge over it later in this walk. In the 1640s, the bridge and Islip's nearness to Oxford made the village a strategic objective for both sides in the English Civil War. Until the 18th century, the ford remained the main crossing except in winter. In that century, the road between London and Worcester became a coaching route, and Islip developed as a staging post. Islip was on the winter route between Oxford and Buckingham when Gosford Bridge was impassable. All of these facts will become important as we walk around. Our first landmark is the Red Lion, right in the centre of Islip village. This was once a medieval tavern and had many names in its early years. For example, it was known as the Hopping Hall in 1434. By 1531 it was owned by the Crown, much like the pub of the same name in Charlton-on-Otmore. The interior of the modern building is exactly that, modern, but some original features remain, such as stone walls and painted timber beams. Not long ago, the Channel 4 programme Time Team dug up the Red Lion's car park. They were looking for the remains of a chapel connected with Edward the Confessor. More on that in a bit. Next we have the War Memorial. This one sits on a 3-stepped square base surmounted by a square section plinth, capstone, octagonal shaft and a wheel cross. The whole memorial is enclosed by a floral ribbon border garden and paving stones. There are 32 names on this one. 25 men died in World War I from Islip and 7 died in World War II. Okay, I don't think we've seen a railway station so far in Oxfordshire. We have now. Here's Islip Station, which is on the Buckinghamshire line, which we've been following over the past couple of days. Let's see what this one's all about, shall we? I don't think there's much to it, quite frankly. I think it's a really small station. We'll soon find out. During the 18th century, when Islip was an important staging post between Worcester and London, there were at least 6 inns, a remarkable number for a village of this size. The coming of the Oxford Canal in 1790 led to a sudden downturn in Islip's fortunes, although this was briefly revived when a railway station was built. On the 1st of October 1850, the Buckinghamshire Railway opened Islip Station as a double-tracked, 2-platform station with a goods shed, and that's the way it stayed for over a century. It wasn't until 1968 when changes were made. In that year, British Railways withdrew passenger services from the Buckinghamshire Railway and closed all intermediate stations, including Islip. In 1987, passenger services were reintroduced on the section of the line between Oxford and Bicester, and 2 years later, Islip regained its station. This time, though, it was a single-platform, unstaffed halt. The only time since then that it's been closed was in 2014 to allow for an upgrade of the line. During this time, Islip Station gained a second platform and a brand new car park with 23 spaces. Islip has a limited service. Trains call here approximately every 2 hours, providing the village with a link to Oxford in one direction and London Marylebone in the other. Close to the station is Islip's medical practice, standing on a plot of land north of the railway line. Speaking of doctors, this next thing is all to do with a doctor. His name was Robert South, and he was rector of Islip in 1678. He provided funds for the original village school to be built, and to this day, Dr. South's school is still going. Robert South was a Londoner, born in Hackney in 1634. He attended Westminster School and Christ Church College, Oxford, where he took his master's degree in 1657. He was appointed public orator at the university and was installed as a canon of Christ Church Cathedral in 1670. He was a schoolboy during the Civil War and supported the king. Whilst at Oxford, he secretly became a priest. After the restoration of the monarchy, he became a Doctor of Divinity and was made a canon of Westminster Abbey in 1663. Soon after, he was chaplain to James, Duke of York, who became King James II. Dr. South gained a reputation as a fine orator and preacher, but despite his reputation and influential connections, he never gained high office. He was offered a cathedral on more than one occasion, but never the one he wanted. On his death in 1716, he was buried in Westminster Abbey, where an impressive monument to him may be seen today. In 1678, he was appointed rector of Islip by the Dean and Chapter of Westminster, a post that he held until his death. He never lived in the village, but was instrumental in a number of charitable projects designed to improve the life of the church and the community. Dr. South's contribution to education and the founding of the school which bears his name is what he's best remembered for in Islip today. Dr. South's primary school coat of arms, worn by pupils as part of the uniform, is taken from that attributed to Edward the Confessor and reflects the modern values of the school beautifully. The school you see here today isn't the original. In 1893, a new school building was completed to replace the original 1710 premises, but even that has now been superseded by a modern 20th century premises. As far as a village shop goes in Islip, there's a story to tell there. It's inside Islip Village Hall, which was built in the early 1950s but extensively refurbished for the millennium. It now provides a fantastic community facility for both the residents of Islip and those from neighbouring communities and beyond. The range of bookings it has is very varied, from business meetings and toddler groups to concerts, plays, parties, keep fit classes and full wedding receptions. The Village Hall Committee is a group of villagers who get together on a monthly basis with the task of managing and maintaining the hall and its fabulous outdoor recreational space. The shop opened on the 14th of October 2000, prompted by the closure of the stores, the only shop in Islip at the time. When owners Chris and Janet Busby called it a day after more than 4 decades, the 600-strong community of Islip was left with no shop. Volunteers sprang into action, including one Henrietta Lacer, who assembled a group of people to set up a volunteer-run shop to replace the stores. 20 years later, that shop is thriving, selling a rich assortment of items, with many being sourced locally. In 2003, the shop won the Oxfordshire Award for Top Community-Owned Store of the Year, and in 2010 it celebrated its 10th birthday with a party which was covered in the local rag, the Oxford Mail. As if that wasn't enough, in 2015 the shop was on the telly as its story was covered by That's Oxford TV. Well, so far this has been quite an enjoyable walk around Islip. I'm certainly loving the fact that the sun's come out now. We've got a clear blue sky. It's definitely not as cold as it was at the beginning of this morning when we were in Fencott and Mercott. The ice seems to have disappeared, and that's all good. Now we're going to cross the playing field, and this looks great in the sunshine too. Past this playing field, past this play park I should say, playground, across the playing field and towards our next part of the village. The playing field is behind the hall and it has a small children's play area with some items made mainly of wood. At the centre of it is a large wooden Viking ship, completing a Viking theme with a number of sculptures. The large adjacent field is perfect for ball games, and speaking of which, I found a football on the field. Do you think I could resist? Absolutely not. Now, in terms of religious buildings, the one that most people gravitate to here in Islip is the church. That's coming shortly. However, Islip used to have a Methodist church as well, and there's been a Methodist witness in the village for over 200 years. The first recorded mention of a Methodist building in Islip was simply as a house solely for the worship of God. That was in 1788, the year in which Charles Wesley died. Where that house is or was is unclear, but the chapel you can find in Islip today was built in 1886. Islip's Methodists had a rich and varied church life with an active Sunday school and choir. Students from the John Wesley Society led occasional services during term time, always enjoying the hospitality of local church members. This ceased to be used as a place of worship in 1988. The chapel building in Church Lane was sold, and now it's a private house. The organ, though, lives on. It's still in use at St Andrew's Church in the parish of Oddington. Now, if we're talking religious buildings, you're not going to get any more important here in Islip than that one that's right behind me there. That is the church, of course. Now, we're going to make our way through the churchyard and talk a bit about this. But there's also another church to talk about, which was located not a million miles away from this one. I'll explain in a moment. So to the church, St Nicholas's, and this is the main focal point in Islip for good reason. Tradition says that Edward the Confessor was baptised in a Saxon church in this very village. Now, because Edward was born in 1004, it cannot have been this church. St Nicholas's earliest parts date from 1200. Instead, it was a wooden church north of the current building. Known as Edward the Confessor's Chapel, it was damaged in the English Civil War and demolished in the 1780s. The damage was caused by the Battle of Islip Bridge in 1645. During the Civil War, the village changed hands several times until Oliver Cromwell finally took control after the battle, and he then occupied Islip throughout the Siege of Oxford in 1646. Monks from Westminster Abbey studying at Gloucester College, Oxford, used to celebrate the Feast of St Edward at the Confessor's Chapel before it was demolished. Nobody knows for sure exactly where it was. This is what Time Team were trying to determine in 2006 when they dug up the car park of the Red Lion. As for St Nicholas's Church, well, that's got a bit of history to it too. Although the oldest parts are, as I said, from 1200, the church was largely rebuilt in the 14th century. The chancel was rebuilt in 1780 before the whole building was restored in 1861 by the Gothic Revival architect E.G. Bruton. Today it comprises a chancel, a nave with north and south aisles, a west tower and a south porch. In 1824, some medieval wall paintings were uncovered in the south aisle. They included an adoration of the Magi and a weighing of souls, both of which were considered to have been painted late in the 14th century. We've emerged onto the village green where there used to be a set of stocks. I've got no idea where they are now though, but Google Maps still shows them on this patch of greenery. If I didn't know better, I'd say that building behind me at the end of the walk is an old pub, and the reason for that little bit of logic is because above its door there's a plaque that says Worcester Arms. I reckon that is one of Islip's former drinking establishments. Right, now we're going to make our way to the southern part of the village, the bit that's sort of split off from the main cluster by the River Ray, and down there's definitely some bits of note. Now we're on the bridge over the River Ray, heading south towards a piece of Islip that's isolated from the main village cluster. This is the first time we've seen this river since we've been in Cherwell. Historically, this waterway has been used for navigation and fishing. In recent years, the river has become a little overgrown and polluted. On the 4th of July 1645, the parliamentarian Lord Fairfax had his men demolish the bridge over the River Ray that existed at the time of the Civil War. It was described back then as having been new built. After the war, the bridge was rebuilt or replaced, and John Ogilby's Britannia Atlas of 1675 describes it as having 6 arches. In 1788, the road over the Ray was turnpiked, and the turnpike trustees closed a ford which predated this bridge. The Dean and Chapter of Westminster Abbey, who were responsible for the bridge's upkeep, objected to the increased traffic and wear on the bridge. In 1816, they tried and failed to pass responsibility for these repairs to either the turnpike trustees or the county. An engraving published by John Duncan in 1823 shows the bridge as having 4 arches. In 1878, the Thames Valley Drainage Commission widened the river and replaced the bridge with one of 3 arches. This is Collis Street, just after the bridge over the river. It's a dead end and not all that exciting really, but wander down here and you'll come face to face with a house that sports a blue plaque. The house in question is named the World's End, and it was once the home of the famous wartime poet Robert Graves. St John's College professor Graves lived in the house between 1921 and 1925. He paid 10 shillings a week rent and lived with his wife and their 4 children. He attended Charterhouse School before serving in the Royal Welsh Fusiliers in the First World War. During the conflict, he served in the trenches in 1915 until the start of the Battle of the Somme. He was injured in 1916, 4 days before his 21st birthday, by shrapnel which went through his lung. He was picked up by the medical team and left in a corner. It wasn't until the next morning they realised he was still alive. Having survived the war, Graves was married twice. He met his first wife, Nancy, who volunteered as a land girl in 1917 and took the bold step of keeping her own name when they got married. He later had those 4 children, called William, Lucia, Juan and Thomas, with his second wife, Beryl Pritchard. Graves was a member of Islip Parish Council and lived in the village while suffering shell shock. In 1971, he was made an honorary fellow of St John's College, and the Robert Graves Society archive is now held there in trust. 14 years later, in 1985, he died at the age of 90. To return to the main part of Islip Village, we have to cross the Ray again. To get back to the bridge, we're using part of a local footpath known as the Confessors Walk, a reference to Edward. From Collis Street, it skips through the Millennium Wood and returns us to the road. If you walk along it in the other direction, it takes you to the point where the Ray meets the River Cherwell. The Confessors Walk is only a mile long, in other words, just a gentle amble. It can be extended if you turn left rather than right on reaching the Cherwell and take in more of the river before turning back towards Islip. The Confessors Walk combines the beauty of the Oxfordshire countryside with that remarkable sense of history that envelopes this picturesque area. That's a little adventure, that, walking through those woods, because the paths aren't greatly defined very well, so I had to sort of guess at certain points where I was, but luckily Google Maps and stuff like that exist these days, so I found my way out eventually. Now we've made it back to the road and we're about to cross back over the river. There's a bit more to tell you about this, and then we're going to head for a pub which is on the other side, and then make our way back to the car via a big residential area. Back over the Ray we go now. Here's an interesting fact for you. The Domesday Book recorded a watermill at Islip. In fact, a mill survived in the village until 1949, when it was demolished. When the Domesday Book was compiled, Islip's common field system was on the northern side of the River Ray. Sometime before 1300, the villagers cleared about 200 acres of uncultivated land south of the River Ray and east of the River Cherwell, dividing it into strips as a new common field for strip farming. In the 1970s, that area of farmland was called Sart Field, and if you walk the Confessors Walk in the other direction, you'll skirt the edge of it. The River Ray actually has 2 courses. Just outside Islip, it splits into the Old River Ray and the New River Ray. The New River is a man-made channel dug through Otmore in order to divert water flow around its northern and southern edges. In the latter half of the 20th century, local men called the Deep River Boys maintained the river. They cut reeds and trimmed the banks, allowing canoes to navigate it. The last landmark on the route is the Swan Inn, a 17th century Cotswold stone pub with a history of changing hands and uses. In 2022, the pub was refurbished and reopened as a fine dining restaurant. It's had many other uses down the years, including as a Chinese restaurant and a B&B. It's not always been popular with the locals. Perhaps the one thing that it's most known for these days would be the Signet Room. It's the pub's on-site restaurant, which has a barn-like space decorated with local art. The Signet Room also has themed bathrooms too, including Churchill, Oxbridge, Badger and Heaven. The food served here can be categorised as modern British with a twist. The chef patron, Paul Welburn, has his own style after all. There's also a lounge area here called the Majlis. That's an Arabic word which means small plates. From here on in, it's all residential, so we'll throw in a couple more facts as we walk. Islip is linked to two plays. First of all, dating from 1780 until at least 1894, one of them depicted a girl called Molly who fell ill with toothache, only to find on extraction that a nail was causing her the pain. There's also another play featuring Fat Jack, a comic servant. The Shakespearean scholar and collector of English nursery rhymes and fairy tales, James Orchard Halliwell Phillips, lived in Islip in the 1840s. The rock band The Candyskins also had its origins in Islip too, in the late 1970s and early 1980s. As mentioned earlier, Islip once had 6 inns, located as it was on a major coaching route. A number of houses in the village bear the names of them. The Plume of Feathers, also called the Prince's Arms, was built in around 1780, reputedly from materials from the demolished Confessors Chapel. It's since been demolished. The King's Head, also called the Coach and Horses, was built in the 17th century and became a private house in 1976. There were also inns called the Boot, the Britannia, the Fox and Grapes and the Saddler's Arms. The Saddler's Arms was still trading in 1949 but has since closed. Some of the Westminster prebends met their tenants at the Red Lion. And the connection with Westminster Abbey is very much in the forefront of village consciousness today. Numerous signs often publicise a charity bike ride from Islip to the Abbey. 3 deans of Westminster were also rectors of Islip. The last of these, William Buckland, served as the first professor of geology at Oxford University. John Islip was abbot of Westminster from 1500 until 1532 and was responsible for enlarging the Abbey Church. It seems likely that this Abbot John was a native of Islip village, not that the name was in any way a massive clue. Okay, we are back to Middle Street and we have finished our walk around Islip. I've just had a quick look at the Strava map, which you'll see at the end of this episode, as in every episode if you're new. It looks a bit of a mess, to be honest with you. The reason being because there's a lot here and it's kind of far-flung all over the place. Had to be creative with my route, I suppose. But that's it, we are done with Islip, and that means we can move on to the next one, which is, thankfully, a little bit smaller than this, but no less interesting. See you tomorrow. In conclusion, Islip is a wonderfully attractive village with numerous historic buildings, some of them prettily thatched. It can't be denied that for a small Oxfordshire village, seemingly in the middle of nowhere, the history here is unbelievable. From Edward the Confessor to the English Civil War, Islip really is quite the storied little village. I loved every step of this walk. See you tomorrow, everyone. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.